Hey there, Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. It's from a channel I've covered a lot. It's Alternate History Hub. And the alternate history scenario they've got here is called, what if the Soviet Union never formed? All right, the original video link is going to be down below. Please support Alternate History Hub. And this should be a fun one to think about. Here we go. Our original thought, obviously, was that the Russian Empire is going to continue. So let's see what happens. I don't know. Is there no Bolsheviks? Do February, March Revolution not happen? Does October Revolution happen? A lot of things. So we'll see which points they focus on here.
Revolutions. Fascinating turning points in history when a series of events cause a massive change in the status quo.
France.
But between the American, French, Haitian, and Iranian, none were as radical as the Bolshevik October Revolution of 1917.
Would you guys agree with that? The most radical? Boy, it did change a lot, I guess. I mean, the thing is that other revolution is brought up there, minus the American Revolution. Not very revolutionary, to be honest. All right, when you really look into it philosophically. French, Haitian, right? Like basically the only successful slave revolt in history. France, it's chaos, and then it kind of reverts back to its old ways and stuff. Okay, I'm down with Russian Revolution being that way. Consider that.
Cascade of events in a backwater country led to one of the most dramatic, violent, and complex times that deeply impacted every human being in the 20th century.
It really
While there
is
are
true.
thousands of spinning plates that led to all of this, at the root of it all, we have two people.
The dog is playing with a
Nicholas II,
squeaky toy in the
last
back. I'm
Tsar
sorry.
of Russia, and Vladimir Lenin. Both men were hardcore
Vladimir
idealists,
Ilyich
one tied to the old
Lenin.
world, while the latter wanted to burn it all down, so a new one was made. Nicholas was often completely detached from reality, ignoring the state of the largest country on earth. While
I mean, to be fair, that's what they thought. That's what the Russian people felt about every Russian monarch, is that they were completely detached. They're living in a system, a feudal system. It's the 20th century here that is so outdated by centuries. And in an industrial world, this imperial world, Russia has fallen by the wayside. Immense disparity between rich and poor. Most of their people are serfs. It's like that stuff was supposed to end a long time ago. A lot of people forget that about the conditions before the revolution, because a lot of people talk about the living conditions, you know, in the Soviet Union and how awful they were for so many people. The conditions before, yikes.
Lenin was a
lot of people would take that.
manipulation who could sway
Would take
millions
the
of people
Soviet era.
with the spoken and written word. Ignorance and manipulation led to one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, and led to one of the most oppressive regimes with no free speech. So what if Lenin never made it back to Russia in 1917?
So Lenin, if you didn't know, we'll see if he gets to it, but he gets exiled. Him and his family were enemies of the government for years. His brother, right, was killed because of their, you know, anti-monarchy stance and work. Kicked out of the country, and yeah, the Germans end up tracking him down and sending him into Russia during World War I, into the Russian Empire, hoping that a revolution is going to derail the whole Russian war effort. And boy, it did. It was actually like one of those things that Germany gambled on and actually worked. But remember, long term, the Soviet Union is then going to stomp out Germany in World War II. So, you know, short-term win, long-term fail.
As I already mentioned, he is the second most important man for the October Revolution, so let's quickly summarize the reign of Nicholas II. Let's see here. He was turned paranoid and anti-reformist after witnessing his granddad, Alexander II the Liberator, get his legs blown off. He started his reign by hosting a grand ceremony for his coronation, at which
assassinated after, you know, what the Russian monarchy would have thought is like the Russian monarchy was doing good things, right? They had like abolished serfdom and stuff like that, but then the conditions didn't really change much. You know, earlier I was saying that they're basically serfs, you know, still, and it's like not a lot had changed, you know, for the Russian people, but at least some of these legal definitions had changed. So he's like, you know, we had been doing good things and they still hate us, therefore we better not do any more changes.
1,300 people died in a ceremony for his coronation, at which 1,300 people died in a stampede.
Well, that was a horrible, stupid thing they were doing with her. Like, everybody can come to the coronation, all the people, we don't have enough food, we don't have all this. Thousands of people end up showing up and end up dying. Look into that. This thing is so wild. I remember when I first heard about it, it was just like a party where 1,000 people die, like happens like in frat parties, right?
The first impression his people got of him was a young and cheerful czar dancing his worries away as the bodies were carried off the main square. He led a country a century behind the rest of the world as it struggled to industrialize and build the biggest railroad project in history.
And remember, it really showed that Russia was behind. It made them show they were behind is when Japan kicked their trash, right, in the Russo-Japanese War, which was just ending at this time.
In 1904, a surprise attack from the Japanese led to a glimmer of hope. Nothing like winning a war in which nobody is willing to protect the attacker, but instead, it was a world-renowned humiliating defeat.
Rest of Europe was like laughing at them.
Pacific Fleet, alongside its army,
it really, seriously, in like racist tones, they were like, dude, you guys lost to Asians? That's literally like how people reacted in Europe.
By the Japanese. The war led to strikes, famine,
not to bring down Japanese, holy crap,
culminating in a peaceful march on the Winter Palace by a friar and mob that sung Russian songs and prayed for the Tsar's good health, only to be gunned down by inept soldiers guarding the royal residence. The reaction to this bloody Sunday was the Revolution of 1905, which
a lot of people forget there were Russian revolutions before the 1917 one, just to differing, effects. But it's not like it came out of nowhere. Biggest deal, is now you're going to get like, communists coming in there as a larger group. But World War I is really like the catalyst that really made it possible, to be successful long term.
Granting religious freedom, gave autonomy to the universities, and most importantly, he turned Russia into a constitutional monarchy, forming the Duma, or parliament. But within 2 years, he reneged on his promises, made the Duma obsolete, and used the military to crack down on dissent, exiling thousands to Siberia. In the next decade, powerful ministers...
it wasn't just Stalin with the gulags sending people to Siberia. Holy crap, they had done that all over the place. Was it Stalin was sent to Siberia like 6 times or something like that? And always, found a way to escape, which is crazy.
Competed for power, while socialist ideas were slowly creeping up amidst the peasants and
around the world,
of the
by
country.
The way, globally.
Russia's rapid industrialization.
Let's remember that. This was not the whole like importing of socialist ideas was a phenomenon around, well, really the second industrial revolution globally, right? And pretty much every country, okay? Because it's like you were either an industrial imperial power or you were basically a colony. Remember that was basically the relationship of countries and the status of countries at this time. And both sides had people that were like supportive of like socialist ideas at the core of being in control, or for workers and the people having control over their own whatever lives, economies, workplace, all that stuff. That could happen if you were a colony and you're anti-colonialist. Okay, then those socialist ideas and retaining your own resources and all that and autonomy that way was obviously a beneficial thing. But then when you're in the imperial state too, if you're a worker, it was appealing too, because you're like, my country is growing so great from this era of industrialism and imperialism, but those things are not coming back to helping the actual average worker even there. So that's why this is an international phenomenon, and why it just took place in such a, but had taken place in such a larger, with a larger result in Russia than anywhere else in the world, which is why I think a lot of people just think about communism in relating into Russia or socialism in general, when it was a movement all around the world, just to varying effects.
Was only matched by its even more rapid radicalization. But like most monarchs, Nicholas was only concerned for secession, since out of his 5 children, only his last one was a boy,
the hemophiliac,
who sadly suffered from hemophilia risking death at
or
even
Rasputin,
the
come on.
tiniest cuts or bruises.
Talk about
But
Rasputin.
overall, the Duma was starting to somewhat function.
They hid that from the population, by the way. They didn't want to see this heir to the throne as this like weak boy with a deadly disease, you know what I mean? So they kept that kind of, hush, and then bring old Rasputin in to come and calm the boy down, which actually was said to be very helpful. But that's another story. But yeah, people thought that Rasputin was pretty much a puppet of the royal family as well.
The Trans-Siberian Railroad was completed, the army was modernizing, and the Russian economy was about to become a powerhouse. Surely it
Largest
would take
in Europe
more to
by
topple
World War
the
I.
centuries-old Romanov dynasty. Oh, what's that? It's 1914?
Well,
and
yeah.
Franz Ferdinand just got shot.
Up.
After Hindenburg, the general, not the Zeppelin, crushed the Russian attempts to invade Eastern Prussia, the weakness of the Russian army was apparent. So
yeah, so it's Russia was still growing its time. They needed more time for their military, I guess. Recovered only recently, within a decade from losing to the Russians, or to the Japanese. But their army was huge. It was like 6 million. It was the largest army in Europe. But as we know, that's not everything when it comes to how good your military actually is.
Bid to save his country, Nicholas left the capital and assumed command, not as a general
he actually went
or
there.
strategist, but more as a cheerleader.
But didn't know what he's
boosting
doing.
morale. While this led to some
Went to the
limited
front lines.
it also left the capital
Doesn't know what he's
exposed,
doing.
and the Duma decided that they were better off without him.
And Rasputin, this is when they say he had really taken over control, that he was totally puppeting now, especially, the Tsarina, because, Nicholas is out there LARPing as a general, right? And Rasputin's here pulling the strings back into capital for the life there. They didn't like that.
The capital, now renamed Petrograd to sound less German, was seized. And Nicholas
Remember, it's the royal family's German,
back.
right? You guys know that, right? Like, they all come through that dynasty with Catherine having coming over and everything, but they had Germans intermingling that. But remember too, pretty much like the major kings of the royal families of Europe, they're all related anyways, right? Queen Victoria in England's like the grandmother of all of them. So you got Wilhelm, for example, and then just for the context of World War I, and Nicholas, who are literally cousins. Right. And Russian people aren't going to like that, too, because they didn't feel that, like, especially by this era of the royal family was like not even Russian anymore.
The Tsar was forced to abdicate, and the monarchy was replaced by the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky. This was the so-called February Revolution.
A lot of people forget that too. It's not
which hoped to
the commies yet.
transform the Russian state and society, granting civil liberties, freedom of speech,
supposed to look like a modern republic, sort of.
The only issue was that it was fractured
Liberal
into
republic.
many different factions, each competing for power in the middle of the Great War, with Germany knocking on their door after already taking all of Poland and Lithuania. Speaking of Germany, they didn't just have the best military in the world at the time. They also had another trick up their sleeve.
What?
Vladimir Lenin, the exiled wild
Send him back
card,
in, baby.
sitting in Switzerland.
Give him money
ready
and
to
weapons.
cause chaos and spread Marxist
A secret
ideas,
train.
holding the light that would make the powder keg of Russia explode. The German state loaded him and a few other revolutionaries on a train and sent him to Russia. It was on that train that he wrote the April Theses, the directives instructing the Soviet.
So he wasn't even there, like, for the first part, like, the February Revolution. A lot of people forget it's kind of two-stage, right? So you got this first provisional one, which looks like a modern liberal kind of like government. It's got a constitution, a new legislative body, and all this stuff. But you could see the power vacuum. It was so hard for them to like transition into this like democracy right in after centuries, or all they've ever known is monarchy, right? And then trying to make this transition. And you have these new political parties, and people don't really know how it operates. And while in the midst of the brutalest war that's ever happened, World War I, it's like this was not a great time to make an easy transfer of a just massive change of government structure. It's like, how could it not have been weak? You know what I mean? And the Bolsheviks there, this was the perfect time for them to do this. It's like the monarchy's gone. They don't have to deal with that anymore. Now you just got to deal with this ineffective, weak government with all these factions. It's like way easier now for the communists to do their goals than it was and at this time, before the monarchy had been abolished, which again, something they'd already tried before. So it's like perfect time.
The provisional government and start.
And for Germany, it was like win-win situation.
Keep in mind that these writings formed the backbone on
For
which
now.
the Soviet state would later be built. The truth is that the communists were divided in many different parties
true.
who lacked focus.
There wasn't one
and
unified
many were
one.
willing to make compromises. But Lenin wanted to go all the way,
Like the
no matter
Bolsheviks
the
and
cost.
Mensheviks?
And the final result of his speeches was the October Revolution of 1917.
This is the commie one.
He became the unquestionable leader and gave his allies a mission, something his opponents never had beyond, we hate the Bolsheviks. But what if that train derailed? What if Lenin
Who was that
never
from?
made it back to his homeland? The year is 1917, and the divided provisional government of Russia actually is made up of two governments, the second one being the Petrograd Soviet, led by Leon Trotsky. Alongside them, there were many
Trotskyites.
monarchists, industrialists, nationalists, and even anarchists.
It's basically like the non-communists are all just like one big group. And they're, with the Russian Civil War, they'll be known as the whites. It's just like communists and then like everyone else versus everyone else.
Each with their own goals and ideology. But the biggest question on everyone's mind was how this unstable nation would defend itself against the Germans. In public, the PGR stated that
the provisional government
pursuing
sucked.
peace. But in reality, they
not a
planned an
loss.
offensive in July,
Or not a draw.
which aimed to restore
This was so
troop
dumb.
morale, which was waning, as the army now had no idea who or what they were fighting for.
It's kind of an interesting thing. Here's a what if I can already throw it at you. What if the provisional government had signed a treaty? Because the war wasn't as bad as it was going to be. They would have had a little bit more leverage. But they do this awful offensive, again, under the provisional government, the new government, right? And they're going to make it's going to be really bad. And then now they have zero leverage. And the treaty that they ended up getting with Germany was terrible for Russia. Absolutely terrible for Russia. So you wonder if they had made a treaty. Here's a what if for you. If they had made a treaty that wouldn't have been as damaging to Russia during the provisional government, would the October Revolution have happened?
Break the stalemate, reconquer lost territory, and restore the confidence of Russia's allies, France and Britain. 900,000 soldiers were committed to this push, which ended up in disaster. Once again, morale plummeted. To make matters worse, General Kornilov,
proved the provisional
of the
government
most successful
sucks.
detachment of this campaign, was now emboldened and decided to take matters into his own
Be a dub for the
hands,
commies as
launching
well.
a coup against the failing government. In a wild panic, Kerensky turned to the Soviets despite their own failed coup and armed their militia groups as a last resort. He chose what he saw as the lesser evil, but like the most recent Russian coup attempt,
And chosen
the plot
L
dissipated
side.
within months. Up until this point, Lenin's presence does not alter these events at all, but this is the full departure and the beginning of a totally different timeline.
Okay.
You
This
see,
is the one we're
Jimmy,
breaking on.
The Marxist ideas and various groups who appealed to the lower classes may have been present in Russia at the time, and now they were armed with not only opportunity, but guns. But the various groups like the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, Social Democrats lacked the radical vision Lenin had, and never dared to reach for the stars. Even in our timeline, Lenin was considering elections after the overthrow, and didn't imagine that his revolution would take the course that it did. So what we see next is a steady...
Thing is, though, the
but
early years of when Lenin actually does come into power still compromised with a ton of these other groups that weren't as radical in creating some still like private ownership of things. And just as an example, it became much more radical, later on, because he basically had to, when they do come into power, had to compromise and peel back some of the stuff that was, at the core what he, wanted, the goals of communist society or whatever at some point, but still dabbling in things that weren't that extreme.
total divergence. Instead of overthrowing the government, the Soviets would overtake it. The Bolsheviks would join the provisional government as its most energetic component. Their votes would force Kerensky to pursue peace with Germany, a bit more lenient than that of Brest-Litovsk. In its political fallout, the Bolsheviks would orchestrate Kerensky's resignation. Leon Trotsky would succeed him, as Russia's chief executive.
Think so?
Rising nationalist movement.
I got to look more into this. I know a lot of you watching this are deeper than me, and especially into like the Trotsky and the inner workings at this time of who was really pulling a lot of the strings and stuff. I still have a lot to learn, I feel like, for this. Do you guys agree so far? So far, like Trotsky would emerge, like over Lenin? Okay.
Would seize their opportunity and organize regional councils, breaking off from what was effectively a new government with no ties with the imprisoned Tsar. Among them were Poland, Finland, Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Lithuania,
These would all get their own
Latvia,
groups,
Georgia, Armenia,
councils,
and Azerbaijan. Some of these were led by Soviets who also wanted independent nations. Others wanted independence at any cost. Russia,
just so you know, don't think of, he's using this word Soviet, don't think of it as Soviet for what Soviets are going to mean later, which is just like, you know, USSR, like that kind of thing, and whatever things come to mind of Stalin era, the Soviets usually interchangeable with like Russian stuff. That's not what that meant. The Soviets were like councils.
The government made their choice, and it was one that alienated Britain and France, who would now support all of these groups and all the supporters of the old regime. Not only because it meant bringing Russia back into the fold against Germany, but because they were horrified at the idea of communism spreading to their own lands,
right,
where some symptoms were already very prevalent. Starved for legitimacy, the Soviets would be forced to mirror our timeline in executing Nicholas and his entire family. Despite his many failures, the highly religious Russian society and its aristocracy believed in his God-given rights. While this act would discourage many, it would also light the fuse, leading to an all-out civil war.
Which happened anyways.
As in our timeline, the Allies would now deploy another
Russian Civil War is another thing I'm learning a lot more recently about, because I feel like so much of what we learn about with Soviet Union is like, and the history of it is, okay, October Revolution, and then it's just the Soviet Union. Okay, immediately after that, that's just what happens. When this civil war took another, 5 years, 1922, it finally ends. And like tens of millions of people died. Russian Civil War just gets forgot about. I guess just because the revolution with October Revolution is with the communists, and then it ends with the communists. So like the whole process in between kind of gets forgotten about. Insanely violent and brutal it was.
Leader,
White Terror, Red Terror,
one of the few who reaped successes in World War I. Admiral Kolchak, who was touring the West in a form of political exile. It was there that he made many friends, before he was put in Vladivostok with a mission to take down the Soviet government.
The worst. Vladivostok's on the other side. It's on the most eastern part of Russia, over by the Pacific Ocean.
Far more divided and unstable, the Soviets still held control of most of Russia's industry and population, while the remaining leaderless factions went to war against them. Kolchak was a celebrated war hero who scored major victories in both the Baltic and Black Sea. Now he was appointed as supreme commander of the Russian counterstate. Without Lenin, the Soviet-dominated territories, as well as those of their opponents, would be very similar. But both sides would be a nerfed version of the ones we know. A smaller Bolshevik...
Trying to process here. So now they would be nerfed in this scenario. Yeah, I guess so.
Threat means less support from the Soviets, less resistance from the Whites, and less support from the Allies. The only factions who would be stronger in this timeline would be those who wanted independence. Regardless,
from the
thanks
Russian
to
Empire.
The supplies sent from Britain, France, America, and Japan, the White forces on the peripheries would enjoy a significant advantage. Two other important
more than what they
assets
had
on
in
their
the
side
actual timeline
were the Russian
real
gold
time?
reserves and the support of the legendary Czechoslovak Legion, 500,000 strong. But all of this support and
Czechs,
ambition
man.
also came with a cost. Kolchak was duty-bound to rejoin the war and aid the Allies against Germany and Austro-Hungary, which meant that the vast majority of the Russian
World War I goes back on Oh man, I had to think about that longer and try to follow a little bit about, because I did not foresee that in this alternate timeline though.
Lower class would do everything they could to undermine him. In 1918, the national movements would be left to their own devices, many of which would quickly fall under German influence.
That's what I was gonna say. Like,
in the South,
they would just all have to. I mean, the Germans would just, they wouldn't be as much of a united front. They would all fall to Germany anyways.
Anarchist General Drovdovsky led the armed forces of South Russia, who supported Kolchak, and managed to crush over 75,000 Soviets with just 9,000 well-trained soldiers, capturing a huge swath of land between the Black and Caspian Seas. To the north, area. Another army centered around the city of Archangelsk was led by another general, supported by 14,000 British troops, 5,000 American troops, and smaller detachments from Italy, Serbia, Canada, and France. This force was a lot less successful, and did little more than keep Trotsky on his toes, wondering how he could defend against so many fronts. In reality, the main frontier was to the east, where the Trans-Siberian Railroad brought over 100,000 white soldiers, who clashed with the Reds, similar to our timeline. Progress.
So I was almost thinking that he was saying like they would still have a lot more success, like under Trotsky and stuff, and there's no way.
And both sides resorted to a form of terror. While the
whites
Red
are going to
Terror
win,
is well known, it was actually the white one that was arguably more unforgiving, as Kolchak believed all who stood in his path were traitors who abandoned their motherland in its most desperate hour.
Well, they got their own, they're doing their own thing though.
Despite offers of assistance by both the Ukrainians and Finns, Admiral Kolchak was unswayed
doing with the Germans
and saw all separatist movements as treacherous rebels. While the Red Terror was passed on by the state, and with a heavy focus on officers, the White Terror was indiscriminate. Everyone who assisted the Soviets.
I mean, the real Russian Civil War. There's a Red Terror and a White Terror. A lot of people forget about that.
Or attempted to cut a slice of the Russian Tsardom for themselves.
Just slaughtering
shot,
people.
Hanged,
whole areas,
or otherwise disposed of. Pogroms by the far-right sections of the army were widespread. Tens of thousands of Cossacks were executed. Workers and farmers were exiled to Siberia, even before
the worst
Kolchak
punishment
officially
imaginable.
came into power. With the aid of the British Navy, General Yudenich was able to capture Petrograd, while the government was forced to move to Moscow. However, overextended supply lines, constant rebellions, rigid leadership, divided goals, and the inability to recruit new men.
They're just going to become, okay, so I feel like what's they're foreshadowing here is a military dictatorship that is going to be propped up also by like Western powers, which is happened all around the world. It's like Russia would just become another one of those things, or another one of those instances, a military dictatorship propped up by the Western world simply for the fact that they're not communists, right? A tale as old as
to a crawl.
The 20th century.
Soviets were able to make a stand at Kazan and hold the line, and the Ukrainians managed to beat back Drovdovsky thanks to German firepower, which they repaid with thousands of train wagons full of grain. Trotsky, meanwhile, was successfully arming tens of thousands of new soldiers who felt like they were up against the world.
He's still screwed,
Major powers who wanted to destroy their country and strip them of their newfound liberty. By this point, many questioned Kolchak's character, and with no monarchy to restore, the leaders began to question his motives. While the events in Russia were substantially different,
who will the West promote?
The rest of the world changed very little, except the fact that there was now no great Bolshevik success story.
Right.
This meant that by the end of 1919, the armistice between the great powers was signed. However, the war to end all wars utterly failed to deliver on its promise, as now Britain and France found themselves distracted by the Polish advances, rise of communism in Bavaria and Hungary, and the separatist movements into Ireland, India.
So the like socialist revolutions would have more success in these other places. I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Maybe I haven't followed the line of logic that he's going to. Like, it would be successful in Bavaria and stuff.
And most of all, Turkey. While communism in Russia remained a threat, it was now lower on the priority list. So much of the aid that kept the White Army logistics alive was pulled back, and the Czechoslovak Legion returned home. The newly formed Polish state wanted to jump on the world stage with a bang, and they quickly mobilized for a war against Ukraine. The same occurred between the newly formed nations of Armenia and Georgia. Also Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Rip.
Also Georgia and Azerbaijan.
Is there still an Armenian genocide?
Damn, Caucasus. Are you trying to be the new Balkans?
Oh god! Oh no! Oh no! The new Balkans is in the Caucasus. We have 2 Balkans now. Oh gosh, the world is screwed.
Caucasus? Are you trying to be the new Balkans?
Another place that another World War II could start over, or another World War could start. Far-right Russian autocracy. Okay, this is what I was thinking. I was wondering what happened. Again, my whole thing was I thought I would hypothesize that a military dictatorship operating the behest of Western powers would really just kind of take over.
The massacre of millions. Kolchak won the war, and his victory allowed him to place himself at the head of an autocratic government ran by the same people who supported the Tsar. His ties with the West gave him legitimacy, but the economy was in shambles. Famine was widespread, and the fire...
Yeah, famine would happen no matter what, because in all these wars, because they were talking too about how the White Army is peasants, right? A lot of it is peasants combining with the foreign powers. If you don't have peasants working the food, working the farms, there's no one working the farms. We got a whole... nevertheless, they killed the industrial workers that were the factory workers that were supporting like the Bolsheviks. Now you also have the peasants leaving their farms to fight. That means you have like no industry and you have no agriculture.
Communism raged in the empty bellies of the Russian populace. Finland and
foreign
the
aid's gonna have to
Baltics
be
had
huge.
International support and powerful local regiments who resisted small-scale skirmishes launched by the White Russian government, while an army under General Yudenich was able to successfully reconquer Belarus. Kolchak knew he needed a win, and the support of his Western allies, and to acquire both, he turned to the good old tactic of attempting to win a war and face total chaos if you lose. Paradoxically, the Admiral spent the last 5 years fighting hundreds of miles away from the sea. But in the middle of 1920, an opportunity presented itself.
Gotta put your hand in your jacket.
After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Greece and its allies waged a war deep into Anatolia. But the charismatic Kemal Ataturk led a movement against Turkey's invaders, and was successful in reclaiming most of its lands.
Okay.
This fragile...
I'd agree with that still. Okay, Greece might come in and try to turn that, but like Greece and the future Turkey probably still exists.
Nation was
in the way that
successful against its coalition of enemies. But in this alternate timeline, Russia makes a push for Ankara instead of Warsaw. Which is well planned by the Admiral, who utilizes the Crimean ports and Black Sea Fleet.
There's so many moving parts here. I have a hard time following them all,
which within a
to be
year
honest.
succeeds in folding Ataturk's army and capturing his capital.
Really?
Keep in mind that such a plan was considered by Kolchak in 1916, with the aim of retaking Istanbul. Something which only the Fourth Crusade managed to pull off.
Well,
oh,
no.
Speaking of which, Ultramar is now on an entirely separate channel. A visual novel building an alternate universe in the medieval world, centered around the idea, what if the Fourth Crusade went to Egypt? Anyway, in this alternate timeline,
what if it
the
even went to
Treaty of
the
Severus
Holy Land
is
at all?
confirmed. Kolchak earns the undying support of the Russian clergy, military, gratitude of Orthodox Greece, as well as the support and investments
bottle of
from
vodka.
Britain, France, and Italy. All of which
Oh my gosh, you got like this fat cat dude down here. What is this artwork from?
gain a slice of Anatolia. This external victory stabilizes Russia domestically. The fractured Soviet leadership is quickly given a show trial. Trotsky loses Moscow, and Kolchak turns into a dictator.
Yeah.
A
That's
wave
the one thing I
of
figured would
anti-Semitism engulfs the country, and thousands of Jewish families are exiled,
Oh, good, yeah.
or worse. The Great Depression
More
hits the
pogroms.
world hard, and instead of turning right, Germany is riddled with leftist movements.
Man. That was the one at first I was trying to grasp my mind around about how that would affect them, but I gotta see more to think that leftism would have just taken over in Germany.
In our timeline, right-wing movements owed a lot of their existence
Wait, no
due
Mussolini?
to the fear
Mussolini?
of rising Bolshevikism.
Well, I mean, they were so influenced. The Germans were so influenced by Mussolini too, though, after the war. So, shouldn't something have happened to Mussolini first?
But with a dictatorial Russia, that is highly unlikely. How would world events be shaped by this change? What would a Ukraine that never experienced Stalin's Holodomor
No
look like?
Holodomor?
How are places like Turkey,
nice.
or Greece, or Japan affected? Man, just
Japan,
look at
I
how
don't know.
dramatically this timeline spins out of control,
Yeah, it
only
does.
because of the absence of a single man, Vladimir Lenin, the uncompromising idealist, which managed to give the Bolshevik movement the focus that it needed.
I mean, he sure
Well,
was
Jimmy,
important. no
if you
doubt.
want to explore that scenario, be sure to keep your eyes open for the next sequel poll and vote for it. A huge thank you to all the patrons who continue to support this channel,
That's
as
cool.
well
A
as
lot of
the
patrons.
Discord
Sweet.
members, one of which proposed this very scenario in the first place.
All right, final thoughts. I feel like Cody, just like he was ending at the video, but I felt like that during the whole thing. They added so many moving parts through all of this that I was having a hard time keeping like all the alternate timelines like together. And it's like I would need to watch this a couple times, I think, to really get behind everything and have like a firm opinion, a yes or no on, if all of these things would have happened. I feel like almost more than any other alternate history video I've watched that they've put out, like I need to do that. I need to go through like again multiple times and take some notes and stuff like that. But at least I was giving you my ideas, I feel like, throughout all of that. I think a lot of that was, common sense stuff, but I would want to go back to quite a lot of it once again. So help me out with that, you guys. If you have watching this, I assume you watched the first one. I hope you did, and have seen this a couple times and have put through more thought to what he's saying. And I want to know what you think about this alternate timeline. So let me know down below. Thanks again to everyone that voted. Subscribe to the channel. You'll see it'll be a lot easier to see in your feed the polls I'm going to start putting up. I'm putting out more polls for future videos. I'm getting so many suggestions, over on Discord, which is fantastic, but it's hard for me to pick some of those. So trying to get it to you guys too, to see what you all think and what videos I should prioritize. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.